We've got an interesting passage today. So we're in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verses 15, starting with 15 to 18. I have seen, the header's limits of human wisdom. I have seen everything in this meaningless life, including the death of good young people and the long life of wicked people. So don't be too good or too wise. Why destroy yourself? On the other hand, don't be too wicked either. Don't be a fool. Why die before your time? Pay attention to these instructions, for anyone who fears God will avoid both extremes. So, Ecclesiastes is really an interesting book in the Bible where it's kind of like the opposite of Proverbs. Proverbs seems to say, if you do good things, if you strive for wisdom, you avoid the adulterous woman, just if you just do everything right, life is going to work out. And that's kind of, the way it seems. But Ecclesiastes is like the opposite, or it just is the antithesis to it, or it's just a contradiction, a paradox. I don't know, whatever. It says like sometimes you do the right thing and you're wise and it doesn't work out, and sometimes everything is meaningless. All your hard work, all your good deeds, it ends up doing nothing at all for your life. Proverbs seems to say, you honor your parents, you do right, you'll live a long life, stuff is going to be good. Ecclesiastes says, well, you know what? That's not always the case. At least that's how I interpret it. And that's just kind of how it is. There's a lot more in here, but I thought this one was really interesting. So he says, don't be too good or too wise. How crazy is that? You're telling someone not to be good or not to be wise, not to be too good or too wise. Why destroy yourself? On the other hand, don't be too wicked either. Don't be a fool. Why die before your time? So he's saying being good and being wise can destroy you. But of course, being wicked and being a fool can cause you to die. Being destroyed and dying are two different things. I like, if you've ever read Old Man and the Sea, Hemingway, I believe Ernest Hemingway, the concept, I've heard someone say the concept of Old Man and the Sea is that I think it's like you can't kill a man, or what is it? A man can be destroyed, but he can't be defeated. A man can be destroyed, but he can't be defeated. Anyways, that's not exactly what we're talking about right now. But I always like the sound of that, just that person that's on the ground, like he's, you imagine you're in a ring, you're fighting, and just beat to a pulp. You're absolutely destroyed, but you just keep getting up. It's like that Rocky scene, absolutely destroyed, and he could destroy him all he wants, but he wasn't defeated. He was going to keep getting up. It's like, you can destroy me, but you can't defeat me. And I think we are like that as men, as humans. But anywho, because he ends up like bringing the fish back, the giant marlin, but it was eaten up by the time he brought it back. But he brought back just the head. He still brought it back, even though he was just destroyed in some sense, and the fish was destroyed by the sharks that ate it. But back to the verse. Why destroy yourself? Why be too good and too wise? I think Me and a buddy were just talking about this recently, about, as Christian guys, sometimes we have these expectations we put on ourselves, or that people just have as Christians. Christians don't do this. Christians don't smoke weed. Christians don't do shrooms. Christians don't do tobacco and Zins or whatever. Christians don't curse. All this stuff. And, we were in the Bible and we were just reading, talking, and, he pointed out, or I did, or whatever, we just realized that, and we've had this realization before, those things may be good to abstain from, but where are you going to find them in the Bible? Where are you going to find them in the scriptures? There's scriptures about, holding your tongue, but that doesn't necessarily have to do with certain colorful words, right? You can be just as rude, just as evil. You can gossip. You can do all those things without cursing, right? And on the flip side, you can also curse, but be talking about truth, be doing it in a humorous way, telling a joke, all those things. You can be good-hearted in that way. So it doesn't seem to be, language doesn't necessarily seem to have to do with like holding your tongue and doing good to others and treating others well and how you speak. Not always. Or even like, drunkenness is talked about in the Bible. But, making wine was Christ's first miracle. Can you really say that Christians shouldn't drink? I don't think so. I haven't drank in years. I haven't drank in 2 or 3 years. And I never drank much to begin with. But that's not really a religious conviction. So, but anyways, it just kind of led us to talking and thinking about things more in depth. About, you've got certain people that, whether it's in your life, your church, your family, that they have all these rules, these religious rules that, this is how we're going to act. And you just got to be careful, I feel like. You don't want that to destroy you. Solomon's talking about that. Don't be so good, so goody two-shoes. He says, don't be too good or too wise. Every penny has to be spent perfectly. You got to be really smart with your money. Really efficient with your time. You got to be productive all the time. We can't make any stupid decisions here, right? We can't make any foolish, stupid decisions with our money. Don't go and buy something. Make sure you save that money up, every penny. Make sure everything has a purpose. Don't waste a day, watching TV and doing stuff like that. And it's like, dude, sometimes you need to do that. Sometimes you need to just check out for a day and just watch Attack on Titan all day long on the couch. And sometimes that's what it takes to recharge. Working out is good. Being healthy is good. But sometimes you got to pig out a little bit. You got to go get yourself a cookie cake from Jewel-Osco and eat the whole thing in one sitting. Or go get, 4 cinnamon rolls from Jewel-Osco and eat it all in one sitting. Sometimes you got to do that. And I think Solomon's saying there's room for that, right? Don't be so good, I got to work out 5 days a week. I can't have those sweets because, it doesn't fit in my macros. And I can't use this word. I can't smoke that cigar. I got to be productive today. I got to do something productive today. I think as guys, we've been told that a lot. And some guys need to hear that message, right? They need to hear that message. But I think some guys, they do that for a long time and they get burnt out. And he's even saying, talking about how stuff is meaningless and how even the good, hard workers, they suffer, And I think as a guy, at some point, we've listened to that message, You got to grind all day, 10 hours, 12 hours. You got to hit your macros. You got to lift. You got to do all that stuff. And then, of course, the Christian stuff. You got to do all the Christian stuff right. You can't use this language. You can't smoke that, take that, drink that. And don't do this and that. And we do everything we're supposed to do. But life still sucks. Life still sucks sometimes. Even when you're doing everything right. And he points this out in Ecclesiastes, right? He says you do all the right stuff and it still rains on the poor. Just like it does, it rains on the rich, it rains on the poor. And I think there's truth to that, right? Now if it's a question about treating someone right or doing good to other people, treating others like you want to be treated, the golden rule, that's straight from the mouth of Jesus. That's important. But when it's all about doing all the right things, you got to wake up at this time. Jordan Peterson, you got to make your bed. He'll say, you got to make your bed in the morning. No, dude. What if I don't want to make my bed today? What if I just want to get up and not make my bed? What if I want to come home and instead of lifting, I want to eat some sweets? And I need that. I need that time to gorge myself a little bit, to watch some Netflix. And sometimes that's all we need as guys, to just, the burdens get heavy, life gets tough, and sometimes you just need to check out for a second. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I really don't. I think we all at one time have, been super particular about our day and how productive we are. And, I've done that too, right? And, you kind of get some joy from it. You get this feeling that you're being efficient with your time, and you get this feeling you're doing everything right. And you will reap results from it, right? But I don't know, sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Sometimes, if you know enough people, you find someone, you're like, wow, how are you doing so well? Like, I know who you are. You're lazy. You're a degenerate. You drink on the weekends. But you make some smart decisions. And when you do work, you work hard. And you're doing well for yourself. And life is going good. And this person might not be doing everything perfect, but it ends up working out well for him. And then you might be over here, like, not allowing yourself to watch some movies or, making reading your only form of entertainment. I did that for 2 years. I got rid of my TV. I didn't have a TV. I didn't allow myself to play games or watch movies. Really, my only form of entertainment, I would go to the gym, and my only form of entertainment was reading books. And they were usually like not particularly fun reads. They were fun, it was good information, but they were often like business ones or psychology ones or something like that, or spiritual ones. And I didn't allow myself to just read some fun classic novels. And it was just like every second of my day, was work, was extra projects, was working out. And I can say there was benefits to that, but also I can say at the time, or I can say looking back, in retrospect, it was a lonely time. I would not go out with friends. I would not, because I would say, oh, I could be doing something better. I could be working on this and that, doing this project. Dude, there's always going to be projects. There's always going to be work. That's what I came to realize is that there was always going to be something that I needed to do that was productive. So I had to distance myself. I was destroying myself. I was destroying myself, you know, at a certain point. And, I think there's a time where, as guys, we need to lock in, we need to buckle down a little bit, and we need to get rid of those distractions. But how long can you do that? How long can you do that before you destroy yourself? Before life is no more, life is no longer enjoyable because you're not experiencing anything that brings you joy. You're not experiencing, doing a LAN party with the boys and playing video games, or me and my buddy just built a big snowman out in the backyard like an hour ago. It's like, was that the most efficient use of our time? We could have done dishes. Dishes need to be done. The house is kind of a mess right now. And we could have said, no, we gotta clean up the house. We can't build a snowman. There's stuff to do around the house. There's stuff to do. But I think we just kind of said, screw it, let's build a snowman. And that was a lot of fun. So, I don't know what the balance here is. He even says, don't be too foolish. Right? Don't be too wicked. Don't be, but also don't be too smart. Don't be too smart for your own good. It's like that idea, I don't know which philosopher it was, Aristotle or Plato, that said the virtue is between two vices, the virtue is right in the middle. And I think Solomon's talking about that here, right? You got the perfect goody two-shoes Christian right over here, productive man who never thinks of himself, right? Never thinks of himself, almost a masochist, doesn't do things he enjoys, is only productive. And then you got the degenerate over here, that's all he thinks is the short term, right? And then this person's always thinking long term. One destroys you. The other one, you're going to end up dead eventually. And Solomon's saying that the virtue is between those two vices, right? The virtue's right in the middle. And I think as guys, we tend to do a little bit. We either go one side of the pendulum or the other. At least I know I do. For a couple years, I was on one side. It's like I didn't allow myself any freedom. I didn't allow myself any, And there was good to that. I didn't even really allow myself to hardly date. It's like, oh, I gotta know she's the one. Otherwise, I'm wasting my time talking to her. Otherwise, I'm gonna have too much fun and it's not gonna be the right girl and that's gonna be wrong. I gotta be careful where I go here, right? But just be smart about it, right? And yeah, it was kind of miserable, right? So I think we could all use a little bit of Ecclesiastes. I noticed that that's one of those books that you really don't hear pastors preach much on. It doesn't really fit the narrative, right? Fit this narrative of you got to do good all the time, everything. You have to always do good. And if you do good and you're a good little boy and everything You're doing everything right, life will work out. And if you haven't tried that, try it, right? If you are a degenerate, try that. You might need some of that in your life. But at the same time, if you've done it, you'll know that's not true. Bad stuff still happens to you. You'll still lose money. You might get fired even though you're doing the right thing. You might think you're dating the right girl and doing everything right, and it may blow up in your face. You may be eating all your right macros and working out all the time, and you get an injury or you get sick, right? So you've destroyed yourself for no reason, and you didn't enjoy yourself along the way. I think Warren Buffett said something like that, right? People gave him a hard time for drinking Coke every day, eating candy, and I think he says he eats ice cream every day. And the man's like, he's got to be in his 80s, right? And doing pretty well. And he says, I don't think I'd want to live, even if not eating ice cream being healthier would help me live a few extra years. He says they probably wouldn't even be that good, those extra years. Um, and that's just kind of this wisdom right here. It's like another level of wisdom. The next level of wisdom is like, don't be too wise for your own good. And Ecclesiastes, Solomon was the wisest man on the earth, right? According to scripture. So, yeah, I don't know. I just prayed a little bit and was just reading the Bible. Yesterday, me and a buddy read, not this passage, we reread a different part of Ecclesiastes, but that's where my mind's been. That's where my mind's been. It's been there. And I think we can all point to people. I'm thinking of a couple in particular that, they've done everything right and their wife still left them. Um, they still, I'm thinking of one person in particular with that. Well, actually, I can think of two in that scenario. And I can just think in my own life, right? Where I thought I was the most righteous. I thought I was being the most wise with my time. I was in the Word a set amount of time every day, which is important, but not allowing myself to do any form of entertainment. And there was a benefit, but also started to destroy me. And now I'm kind of more at a level where it's like, hey, we want to go build a snowman. Let's go do it. Let's go build a big snowman. Let's go, I don't know, let's go do this and that. Let's just sit back, eat cookies, and watch some movies and hang out as guys. And I think there's something good in that. And I think that some of us need more of that in our life. And maybe we've been told the opposite. Like, hey, you can't do that, man. Yeah. You can't do that, but I disagree. I think Solomon disagrees here, right? Most wise guy out there, he had everything, you could want. And he came to realize, he says it so many times in this book, everything is meaningless, right? All the tragedies still happen to you. So learn to live a little bit. Learn to live a little bit. Make some mistakes, right? I think a lot of us are afraid to make mistakes, afraid to piss people off, afraid to look foolish. So we're always watching what we say, watching what we do, how we spend our time, and we end up being too wise for our own good. We don't act instinctively at all. We don't act on our impulses at all. If you're doing all of that, if you're only acting on impulse, You're not thinking things through. He says, don't do that, or why die before your time, he says, right? So I think it lies in the middle. It lies in the middle there. Yeah, just something I was thinking about. Something I was thinking about. Ecclesiastes is a really good book about that. And I'm just kind of thinking about that in my own life. Where am I being too wise, too good? Where am I doing that? Where do I need to live a little bit? Where do I need to be a little bit more human? Be a little bit more human. And I think people think, right, Jesus' message was to love your neighbor and to treat others how you want to be treated. And he says the law and the prophets fall under this, loving God and loving your neighbor. And some people are so focused on being religious, so focused on being perfect in the appearance and how they live their life, not making any mistakes, not doing anything, smoking tobacco, drinking, or having some fun with the guys, being a little bit stupid, right? They're so focused on that, and they think that is what God wants. But God wants you to love Him, and He wants you to love others. And that is not having like a perfect religious life where you're being very productive with your time and all that stuff. That stuff can be good, but that doesn't mean you're loving your neighbor. That doesn't mean you're loving God, right? It's not the same thing. That's the most important thing. Jesus says those are the two most important things. So make sure you get those things right. And if you're doing those things, I think that's what God cares about the most. Are you loving Him, and are you loving others? And then after that, don't be too wise for your own good. But for some reason, people think if they're a masochist and they deprive themselves of things, if they think less of themselves and don't think of themselves at all, that's loving others. Not really, right? That just means you're not loving yourself and you're not living your life or enjoying your life. But that doesn't bring others benefit. That's not loving others or loving God. So we need to get that out of our heads. I think those are the same two things, that depriving myself is loving others. It's not, right? So there's room for, like he says here, to be a bit of a degenerate. Just a little bit. Just a hint, right? Not so much that, you die early, he says, but enough where you can be human, be authentic, and enjoy yourself a little bit, right? So, just an interesting passage. I think that we could benefit to read Ecclesiastes more often and gain some wisdom from that, right? Gain some wisdom by realizing that wisdom isn't always the end goal. Gain some wisdom. The wisdom here in this passage, just don't be too wise.